Most of the time, being online just means connection, the click of the mouse, the glow of a screen, that comforting hum of data moving somewhere, out there. You tell yourself it's harmless, because it usually is. But every now and then, the internet answers back. Tonight, I've got 3 true stories about people who went online, or thought they were alone there, when something on the other side decided to reach out. A small streamer whose camera caught more than her chat ever should have, and realized the friends waiting for him weren't alive anymore. Before we start, think about the last time you got a strange DM, a glitch, a message that felt a little too personal. What did you tell yourself it was? Drop it in the comments. I want to know how many of us have felt the internet looking back. This is 3 true internet horror stories from the dark side of the web. If you like strange, dark, and mysterious true stories, you've come to the right place. I'm Minute 60, and every day I tell stories that sound impossible, but might just be real. Let's begin. Lena didn't think of herself as famous. She wasn't one of those streamers with thousands of fans and big sponsorships. Her community was small, just a few dozen loyal regulars who showed up every night. But that was what she liked about it. It felt intimate, comfortable. Her little corner of the internet where things made sense. She had her set up the way she liked it. A ring light on low brightness, a second monitor for chat, and a small owl keychain dangling from her camera arm. The glow of the screen filled her apartment with that particular blue light that makes everything feel a little unreal. Every night at 10 p.m., Lena went live. The familiar chime from her streaming software always gave her a small rush, like stepping onto a stage. Her chat would slowly come alive. "Hey Lena! Ready for spooky night? Let's go!" And her smile would appear, easy and warm. She liked to open with small talk, what she'd cooked that day, a funny customer from the cafe where she worked, something safe. Then the games, indie horror titles usually. Small, atmospheric ones that relied more on tension than gore. She told her viewers she liked games that made her feel watched. The irony of that would only make sense later. Among the usernames flooding her chat, one always stood out: Night Owl. He'd been there since the beginning. His messages were calm and supportive, never inappropriate, never aggressive. He'd donate occasionally, never huge amounts, just enough to make the little cartoon bat flap across her screen. Sometimes he'd send gifts to her P.O. box, always small and thoughtful. LED lights, a coffee mug, a pop filter for her mic. He wrote handwritten notes on nice paper. For better lighting? N.O. For your late nights, keep going. It didn't feel like stalking then. It felt like friendship. When her friends teased her about it, "You know that's weird, right?" She laughed it off. "He's harmless," she said. "He's just a fan." Because that's the dangerous thing about comfort. You get used to it. And when something small feels off, you tell yourself it's nothing. You explain it away until you can't. It started on a night in early November. Cold air pressed against the window, and her chat was in full swing as she played a pixelated horror game about a haunted motel. Everything was going fine until a message appeared from Night Owl. "New lighting tonight?" She smiled. "Yeah, I got a new ring light actually. You can tell?" He replied, "It's softer. Nice. And you moved the plant closer to the shelf, right? It looks good there." Her hand froze on the mouse. That was strange. She hadn't mentioned the plant on stream. She'd moved it that morning, long before she went live. But the angle of her camera hadn't changed, so the plant wasn't even visible in the frame. She forced a small laugh and played it off. "Someone's observant," she said, and kept going. But after she ended the stream, she replayed the footage. The plant never showed. The next day, she convinced herself there had to be an explanation. Maybe the pot had caught a reflection. Maybe he was guessing. Her mind wanted logic, not fear, because fear meant something real, something close. That evening, she posted her usual "going live soon" tweet, attached a goofy selfie with her mug, and went back to setting up her camera. When her phone buzzed, she assumed it was a friend, but it wasn't. The text said, "Blue suits you." She blinked at the message, then looked down. She was wearing a blue hoodie, the same one from the selfie she'd just posted, but that photo hadn't gone live yet. It was still sitting in her drafts. Her heart gave a slow, painful beat. Probably a coincidence, she told herself. Or maybe Twitter's scheduler glitched, posted it early, then took it down. She tried not to think about it. She deleted the draft entirely and hit Go Live. That night, her stream started slower than usual. The chat was quiet. Lena tried to fill the silence with nervous laughter. "Maybe everyone's tired tonight," she joked. "Guess it's just us, huh?" But even as she smiled, she felt that strange pull, the sense that something unseen was listening, leaning just close enough to hear her breathe. She focused on the screen, ignoring the prickling at the back of her neck. Half an hour into the game, she thought she heard something, not from her headphones, but from the room itself. A soft click, like the sound of a door latch settling. Her eyes flicked off screen toward her apartment's front door. She told herself it was the neighbor's, thin walls, old building. Still, she kept glancing back. She turned the mic slightly as if that might help her hear better. "Everything okay?" someone in chat wrote. She smiled tightly. Yeah, just thought I heard something." She kept playing. The next jump scare hit, and she let out a forced laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Then in the corner of her screen, a small donation alert popped up. "Night Owl, $3. You're okay." Just that. 2 words. Most of the time, that message would have been comforting. Tonight, it felt like an answer. After the stream, she didn't turn her lights off right away. She sat there for a while, her room too quiet now that the fan hum had stopped. When she finally went to bed, she kept the phone close. She woke up twice that night. Once because she swore she heard a faint tapping. Once because she dreamed she was still streaming, only the chat was empty and her own face was flickering on the screen like she'd become part of the video feed. By morning, it all felt silly. Anxiety, caffeine, long hours. She could explain it away. She walked to the cafe, made small talk with her co-workers, and pretended her life was normal. During her lunch break, she opened her email. There was a message from N.Al. The subject line said, "Gift idea." The body read, "Noticed your left wall light flickers sometimes, might be your outlet. I could send you a diffuser if you want. It would make the lighting more even." Lena stared at it, trying to breathe evenly. The way he wrote it was so polite, technical, helpful. It almost made her feel crazy for being scared. She typed back a short "thank you" and declined the offer. When she got home that night, she double-checked every lock before sitting down at her desk. That's when she noticed the new notification. "Your camera is being used by another application." Her cursor hovered over it. OBS was open, sure, but that was normal. She checked her task manager. There was another process listed, one she didn't recognize, Camera Helper, EXE. She ended it. The message disappeared. Her stomach unclenched and she let out a shaky laugh. "Tech stuff," she muttered. Always weird. But even as she said it, she covered the webcam with a sticky note before going live. Her chat noticed her nerves immediately. "You okay, Lena?" someone wrote. She forced a grin. "Yeah, just spooky season, I guess. I'm jumpy." The game she picked that night was called The Corridor. It was simple, You walked down a hallway, turned corners, opened doors that led to more hallways. Nothing ever attacked you, but the tension built with every step. She told her viewers it was one of her favorites because it played with silence. It made you notice when something was just slightly off. About 20 minutes in, she stopped moving. On her screen, the game character stood frozen in front of a long, empty hallway. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Her viewers couldn't, but she did. 3 faint taps somewhere behind her. Not random, rhythmic. Tap, 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 like fingernails on wood. The chat lit up. "What was that?" "Are you pranking us?" "Turn around." Lena smiled without humor. "It's just the radiator," she said, but her voice was too tight. She forced herself to keep playing. A few minutes later, the sound came again, closer this time. Then her donation alert chimed. Night Owl, $5. "You're safe." Her hands went cold. That stream ended early. She told her audience her internet was acting up. As soon as she went offline, she unplugged everything, the camera, the mic, the PC tower, and shoved them aside. The apartment was dead quiet now, except for the rain ticking against the window. She sat on her couch, clutching a blanket, waiting for the hum of the refrigerator to fill the silence. But it didn't. The next day, she didn't stream. She told her followers she needed a break. Her chat filled with supportive messages, hearts, and "We'll be here when you get back." Only one message made her freeze. "Take your time, I'm always watching." Night Owl. It was supposed to sound supportive, that's what she told herself. Maybe he meant it figuratively. Fans say stuff like that all the time. She didn't respond. But that night, as she walked home from work, she saw something. Across the street, parked under a broken streetlight, was a dark sedan. Its headlights were off. Inside, a faint glow from a phone screen illuminated someone's face. When she looked, the light vanished. For a full minute, she stood there, pretending to scroll her phone. Then she walked faster. At home, she locked the door and shoved a chair under the handle. She didn't sleep. She kept the TV on low, cycling through old sitcoms just to have noise. Around 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. An unknown number again. The message read, "Your plant looks healthy tonight." Her throat tightened. She turned to look at the plant, its green leaves drooping slightly under the soft glow of her desk lamp. The same lamp she'd left on by habit, even though she wasn't streaming. There was no logical way someone could see it. No window angle, no reflection. It was like the message had come from inside the apartment itself. Lena unplugged her Wi-Fi router, wrapped her webcam in a towel, and slept with her phone off for the first time in months. The next morning, she told herself she was done streaming, just for a little while. But when she turned her phone back on, there was a single message waiting in her inbox. It was from Night Owl. Sent at 3:21 a.m., the subject line said, "Clip from last night." Inside was a link to her own Twitch channel, a recording she hadn't uploaded. The thumbnail showed her room, her desk, her chair, her empty apartment. The video title, "She's Still Here." That's where Lena froze. And if you watch that clip now, because yes, somehow it's still floating around online, you can see it too. For the first 20 seconds, nothing happens. The camera just stares at her darkened room. Then faintly, you see her bedroom door creak open. A figure steps into frame. It's blurry, almost featureless, like a shadow wearing her shape. And then, right before the video cuts to black, the figure looks into the camera and smiles. Most people think the internet is safe because they can't see what's on the other side. They forget that cameras don't just record, they invite. And sometimes, when you invite the whole world in, something decides to stay. Lena didn't click the link for a long time. The subject line sat in her inbox like a thumb pressing down, quiet and constant. The sender field was ordinary, Night Owl, the same neutral handle with the same polite tone. She told herself it was a prank or a glitch or a stray VOD twitch had auto-saved. Then she tapped it anyway, because fear and curiosity share the same electrical outlet. The page opened to her own channel to a video that shouldn't exist with a timestamp at 3:21 a.m. The thumbnail was her room in the dark, the ring light off, but the desk lamp on low, which is not how she left it. The title read, "She's Still Here," and the view counter was stuck at 1. The load wheel spun long enough for her heart to climb into her throat. When the video finally played, it was silent. No mic capture, just the low hiss of camera gain pushing against the dark. For 20 seconds, nothing moved. The lens fixed on her chair, the plant, the tiny owl keychain swaying almost imperceptibly on the camera arm. She could hear her own breathing without meaning to, matched to an image of a room that wasn't breathing at all. Then the bedroom door creaked open in the far left of the frame, slow and deliberate, like the door was embarrassed to be caught moving. A figure stepped halfway into the doorway, a smudge of darker dark. She paused the video with a thumb jab that left a smear on the screen. The frame showed only the suggestion of a person, no face, just that human geometry you recognize even in static. For a heartbeat, she told herself it was her, that she must have sleepwalked, that people do stranger things in the night than they admit. But the figure was too short and the posture wrong, the head canted like someone leaning to find the camera. She scrubbed forward and the shape looked up, and whatever the pixels were doing resolved into intent. She slammed the tab shut, then shut the whole browser like that could also close the room. Her chest felt tight, the way it does when you've run without meaning to and your body notices before your mind does. Then she did something very practical that made sense and gave her a feeling of taking the wheel back. She unplugged the camera from her PC and stuffed it in a drawer. The room didn't change, but the act felt like telling something to wait outside. She texted Liz, her most grounded friend, 2 words that said everything she could manage, weird stuff, and put the phone face down. The reply came 30 seconds later because Liz, in a good and bad way, always had her phone. Call? It read, and before Lena could decide, the phone buzzed with an incoming voice chat. She explained in a looping, thin voice, skipping the parts that felt melodramatic, adding details when Liz didn't respond immediately. Liz listened, then did what practical people do when the ground feels unreliable. She made a list. 1, she said, change passwords. 2, run malware scans. 3, cover all the lenses. 4, you're coming to my place tonight. The list helped. Lists are spells. Lena changed passwords in a feverish cascade, the way you do when you suddenly wonder if your own name has a key under the doormat. She installed 2 malware scanners and watched progress bars crawl while her brain supplied images of the shadow at the doorway, frozen on the exact angle of its head. Both scans found nothing, which meant very little but felt like a doctor saying, "Your vitals are fine," when you know something is still wrong. She taped a folded sticky note over the laptop camera and a bigger card over the DSLR lens, Sharpie drawing a cartoon eyelid that felt brave and ridiculous. Work that day was background noise. The cafe's steam wand screamed, cup stacks chimed against each other, and the morning rush scrubbed hours off the clock with orders shouted and answered. When the rush broke, she told Liz the basics again, and Liz told her to stay visible. "People like that don't want witnesses," Liz said, soft and fierce. "Meet me after your shift, I'll bring Jonah." Lena knew Jonah by association, Liz's cousin, an IT guy who looked at cables like prayer beads. Suddenly, the ridiculousness of needing a tech exorcist felt like hope. They met at a corner table just before close, after the pastry case had been covered with an embarrassed white cloth. Jonah had a small backpack that made him look like a commuter until he started taking things out, a USB drive, an RF detector that looked like a TV remote, and a little pen light he clicked twice before clipping it to his collar. He listened without blinking, then without sympathy, blunt in a way that was paradoxically kind. "Okay," he said, "we start with obvious. Cameras and mics, then network, then dumb stuff like smart bulbs." Lena looked at the folded card taped over the lens and had the sudden, childish urge to add a second piece of tape as if eyes could leak through cardboard. Jonah killed the process, drilled down into the registry, and killed where it respawned. He rebooted and installed his scanner, a tool with a name so plain it sounded fake. The scan rocked back and forth between clean and maybe, like a jury with no appetite for consequences. He let out a breath. If this is it, it's a tool, remote access. They had to first get you to run something. He looked at Liz. "You click unknown files?" Lena started to deny it, and then remembered the codec pack from a week ago, sent in a DM by a fellow small streamer to fix a glitch in her VODs. She had run it while she ate toast and watched an episode of a cooking show, thinking about hollandaise and not about certificates. Jonah's face didn't hold judgment, which somehow felt worse. "We'll save the drive," he said. "For cops if you want. But even if we nuke this box and salt the earth, that doesn't explain the 3 a.m. video." He lifted his chin toward the camera arm. "What's that?" "The owl keychain," Lena said, and heard her voice do something brittle. "A joke from the audience." She lifted it carefully, as if it could be asleep, and it swung on its chrome loop with a lazy, friendly weight. Jonah's penlight clicked, and he tilted the owl to catch the beam. A dot on the owl's chest glinted without glinting. More a seam than a shine, a line where no line should be. He whistled, low, like a floorboard complaining. "Can I?" He didn't wait entirely for permission before he popped a little flathead tool from his backpack and slipped it under the edge. The owl came apart wrong for a keychain. Inside, nested like the plastic layers wanted to keep it secret, sat a board the size of a postage stamp. A ribbon cable led to a pinhole where the owl's breast had been glossy. A chip wore a number and 2 letters like a dog tag. The battery was small but not tiny, taped with the same tidy cynicism you find in cheap gadgets and expensive ones alike. Liz swore softly, a single syllable like something dropping. Jonah pointed with the screwdriver tip. Camera, mic, SD storage, and, he turned the casing, a SIM tray. That's cellular, not Wi-Fi. Lena did not sit down so much as stop trying to stand. Her knees found the chair, and the chair agreed to be found. The owl felt heavier now that it was in pieces, like secrets have weight. She saw every time she had held it up to the camera and called it her production assistant, and pictured a cone of invisible vision reaching out from its chest and falling exactly where her face would be. "How long?" she asked, and figured there were many versions of that question. "I don't know," Jonah said, honest instead of comforting. "Long enough." They argued briefly about police because that is what you are supposed to do when an answer arrives with sharp edges. Liz called to confirm a non-emergency line and was told to bring the device in, where it would be checked in, where someone would reach out, where time would do the part of the job that no one in particular would do. Jonah bagged the owl in a quart-zippered pouch like evidence from a TV show that had accidentally wandered into real life. "That's not the whole story," he said, tapping her monitor with the back of his knuckle, gentle. "If they had the camera and the mic, they didn't need your PC sometimes. They could see whenever they wanted." The room reacted to the sentence, or maybe it was only Lena. The corners felt farther away, and the soft bokeh she had liked began to look like places someone could stand and not be seen. She looked at the bedroom door, where in the video it had creaked. She had no footage of the hallway or the stairs, but she had a key that had not left her bag and a lock that had clicked. "My landlord," she said, grasping for a human reason. "He has a master key. The maintenance guy does too." She let the sentence imagine the rest for her, and then put a hand over her mouth like she could put a hand over that too. Jonah reset the desktop to factory and then past factory to something no factory would recognize, an insult to whatever had installed itself without asking. He set up a new router, a small black brick from his bag, and typed a password that was a paragraph long. He put electrical tape over every lens he could find and smiled at his own superstition. "Low tech first," he said. "Honestly beats most weirdness." He paused at the smoke detector and squinted and then stood on a chair, not because he suspected it, but because the chair was there. The detector was dumb plastic and dust. He blew the dust and the dust drifted as if the room had finally agreed to breathe. When they left for the precinct, the sky had gotten tired of holding rain and let a little go. The station smelled like disinfectant with a lemon accent no lemon has ever made. The officer at the desk took the bagged owl and filled out a form that replaced fear with checkboxes, which helped until it didn't. "We'll have someone take a look," he said, and typed the way people type when their screen is the only thing that is real. "Do you have any suspects?" Lena said no because she didn't know how to say a username to a badge. She said her landlord's name and the maintenance guy's first name because those were the names her mouth could make. Back home, the apartment looked changed because she had named things in it. She left the door open while Liz measured nothing with her eyes, and Jonah pretended to leave so he could come back in like a surprise nobody wanted. "Locks," Liz said, and Jonah nodded like that was a spell too. They drove to a big box store and bought a new deadbolt, 2 wedges for the doors, and a peel and stick alarm that shouted, "If a window, God forbid, made a mistake." It was a lot of fuss to tell a room you are in charge, but sometimes rooms need telling. That night, Lena slept at Liz's place on a couch that had tried to be a bed one too many times and made its resentment known in squeaks. The unfamiliar sounds, the train 4 blocks away, the neighbor with a cough that sounded like an apology, stacked up into a noise that was almost gentler than silence. When she closed her eyes, she saw the shadow lean and look, and the small grin that might have been pixels lying, but might have been something else entirely. At 3:12 a.m., her phone vibrated against her palm, and because she had been waiting with her eyes closed, pretending not to, she didn't flinch. The text read, from an unknown number that was not the last unknown number. "House sitting somewhere new?" She didn't reply. She turned the phone off, which felt like closing the lid on a box with a hole in it. Morning made courage seem reasonable again, as mornings do. She made coffee in Liz's kitchen and held her mug like a defensive charm. Liz arrived in pajamas and no pretense and hugged her with the particular fierceness of someone who has already decided before asking. "Stay as long as you need," she said. "Forever if you prefer a couch that judges your life choices." They laughed because the body needs release valves, and then decided to go back to the apartment in daylight when rooms are least haunted. They went together. Lena unlocked the new deadbolt and felt the pleasing, unfamiliar resistance of metal that had not yet learned her habits. The apartment smelled like itself but subdued, like an audience waiting to see if the show would start on time. She put the kettle on because warm things make rooms agree to be rooms again. Liz opened blinds and said something about fresh air that she almost believed. In that good, ordinary motion, her phone rolled a notification across the lock screen from Discord, an everyone tag in her server from a mod. We've enabled slow mode tonight for safety. She frowned and opened the app. Her general channel scrolled with concern, small digital hands all reaching to hold something they couldn't touch. Above it sat a private message thread from a mod named REI that she hadn't noticed. The first message was calm. We removed a clip that looked fake. The second, less calm. We've had 6 accounts join, all new, all posting the same sentence. The third included a screenshot of a chat window that made the kettle's beginning whistle sound like a siren. The repeated line said, "Turn the camera back on." She didn't stream that night. She posted a 3-sentence update with no details, and hundreds of people replied with kindness that read like prayer beads. Jonah texted a photo of a small device he had found in her hallway ceiling light, the kind of thing you'd mistake for a wire nut unless you knew the era of cheap miracles. "It's a passive mic," he typed. "No battery. Piggybacks the line. They're not geniuses, they're fans of tutorials." He added, like a man offering water in a desert, "We can strip the place." They worked through the afternoon, taking apart her life. Outlet covers came off, baseboards were peered behind. The camera stayed in the drawer like an animal that might bite, even with its mouth taped. In the closet, behind 2 boxes of winter scarves and a humidifier she kept meaning to refill, Jonah found a small rectangular gap where drywall met framing. Inside, tucked upright like someone had placed it with care, not to scratch, lay a phone with the case removed. Its screen was black, but the warmth of it told its own story. He held it up like bad news in a sunlight rectangle. "LTE hotspot," he said, "and maybe a backup eye. There is a shape your throat makes when you're trying not to cry and also trying not to throw up. Lena's throat made it." She imagined every night she had walked past that closet in a t-shirt and socks thinking the world was small and her piece of it smaller and safe. Liz put a hand between Lena's shoulder blades, the way you steady someone walking a beam. "We're getting you out," Liz said. "Pack a bag, pack 2, come on." Lena packed like someone else had shown her how, first the obvious and then the things you forget. Then the documents you never think of until a flood. Then the mug with the chip that smelled like cinnamon, because sometimes your hands choose what your brain won't. When they stepped into the hallway with 2 bags and a plant that had not asked to be included, the building felt like it was being held. The neighbor with the sliding chair opened his door and blinked and said, "You okay?" In the tone of someone who means it, but hopes to not be involved. Lena said, "Moving," which was true, only in the sense that she was moving. On the street, the same compact car she had not looked at before, idled with its wipers, stopped at a middle posture, like a shrug. Jonah walked Lena to Liz's car without looking left or right because some performances are for the audience and some are for the self. They drove in a little, purposeful silence until the city's blocks turned into ones with more trees. Lena pressed her phone into Liz's palm because she couldn't bear it buzzing in her lap for 1 more mile. Liz turned it off. "Airplane mode," she said, a phrase that felt retro and magical. Lena let her head fall back against the seat and watched light flicker through leaves the way it had flickered through pixels. The plant's leaves trembled with each bump, and then settled, and then trembled again, brave without knowing it. At Liz's apartment, they did the simplest strong thing and called Lena's mother. The words, "It's under control," left Lena's mouth and floated like an unconvincing actor across a stage. Her mother, to her credit and her blame, believed exactly as much as the distance allowed. "Stay with your friend," she said, like she was reading a line from a pamphlet you only want to have to read once in a life. "Don't go back for a while." Then, because mothers both see and pretend not to, a small, heavier sentence. "I'll call your uncle. He knows a guy. In the evening, Jonah texted a photo of a police property tag and a case number anchoring their fear to paperwork. Another message followed from a different number, a detective asking for a written statement and listing times they'd be available. The formality made the thing visible in a new way that was both relief and indictment. Liz made pasta and too much garlic, because too much garlic is sometimes the right amount. They ate at the counter with their hips pressed against cabinet doors and listened to a podcast about an old disappearance that had a tidy ending, the kind storytellers make up to help strangers sleep. Then at 10:02 p.m., when Lena would almost always be live, her Discord pinged even in airplane mode because she had turned it back on for a second to send a thank you message and had forgotten to turn it off. It was a new DM request with a handle she didn't recognize that had made itself familiar anyway. Still here 2:37, the message preview read, "Missed you tonight." She didn't open it. She didn't have to. The second preview line populated without being asked, door or wall. Liz's eyes found hers, and they did not blink at the same time. "Block," Liz said, and did it, and still the room did not feel smaller. At midnight, sleep being coy and the apartment being too awake, Lena opened the Notes app to start writing the detective's statement. The act of naming hours and objects and sounds put them in rows like soldiers who would march if you asked. She described the owl, the video, the texts. She wrote camerahelper.x and underlined it twice as if the act engaged some jurisdiction. She described the way the donation chime had sounded like someone knocking softly on the inside of a wall. She ended with a line that looked slick and strong on the page and felt like wet paper in her mouth. "I think someone is watching me." The reply came from the world in the way the world thinks of replies, a siren sliding down the street 2 blocks over, an engine idling, the ordinary sounds of a city continuing to be itself around a woman trying to make hers smaller. Liz fell asleep on the couch and made tiny noises when the cushion shifted under her shoulder. Lena lay on the borrowed bed and watched the ceiling like most people watch TV. At 2:41 a.m., her phone, now across the room on the dresser, buzzed once. In that way, settings reserve for high-priority alerts. She got up because she was already awake and turned it over. The lock screen showed a calendar reminder she had not set. Go live. She did not. She stood in the quiet and watched the small rectangle of light in her palm throw her face back at her from the black mirror. On the home screen, a red notification dot pulsed on her streaming app like a slow heartbeat. She held the power button and waited for the screen to go blank, then slid the phone under a stack of folded shirts like hiding a match from a house. "Not tonight," she said, into the quiet, a host's aside to a room that was not a room and had never been. Then, because sometimes you have to prove to yourself that your mouth still belongs to you, she added very softly, "You don't get to decide." Mourning didn't fix anything. It only made the fear look tidier, like a mess shoved into drawers before company arrives. Lena moved slowly in Liz's kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug that steamed and said, "World's okayest human." She could feel a thin film on the day, the way rooms develop a sheen after too many strangers breathe in them. She kept catching herself listening between sounds, like she expected to hear the internet clearing its throat. The detective called at 9 on the dot, voice crisp with that practiced, calm people wear to make other people feel like nothing terrible is happening. He asked for the short story and then the long one, and Lena gave him both, careful as someone stepping on thin ice. She described the owl camera and the phone in the closet in the video at 3:21 a.m., the way the bedroom door eased open like a person who didn't believe in hinges. He said words like digital forensics and warrant for subscriber data, and the phrases slid around the fear without touching it. He suggested changing locations and routines, which is another way of saying reduce the places something can learn you. Jonah texted mid-call, "At your place, found something else. Call me." He attached a photo of a light switch plate on her bedroom wall, the screws removed, wires exposed. Taped neatly to the inside was a tiny black wafer with a silver edge, like a coin that forgot it was money. The message that followed said, "Bluetooth beacon, low energy, likely tied to a phone nearby, pings when you're within a few feet." Lena swallowed and pictured herself moving through her apartment while small, patient devices took attendance. She thanked the detective and didn't ask the question eating her, the who, because sometimes the who is a door you can't afford to open yet. Liz made a plan on a notepad with a grocery list on the other side. It felt domestic and therefore sane. "You're not streaming this week," she said, underlining nothing with her tone. "We go to your place together when we must. You don't go alone. Jonah's scrubbing whatever the owls of the world installed, and we keep receipts for the cops." Lena nodded, grateful for the way Liz filled the air with steps instead of shadows. The plan didn't soothe the animal part of her brain, but it pleased the part that files taxes. They returned to the apartment just after noon, when the building felt like a patient in recovery, awake, a little ashamed of the night. The new deadbolt turned cleanly, and the door opened onto air that was too still, like the room had been holding itself tight. Jonah looked tired in the specific way screens make people tired. He gestured to the bedroom with 2 fingers, a small military motion he probably didn't know he did. "I've mapped the wireless noise," he said, which earned him 2 blank looks. "If anything talks that shouldn't, I'll hear it." He tapped a little box on the table that blinked a heartbeat of green. Lena stood in the doorway of her bedroom and felt the space try on different moods. In daylight, it was soft and forgiving. Second-hand dresser, thrifted lamp, a print of a lake she'd never seen. She imagined the night version layered over it, a clear film of darkness printed with the shape of someone standing there at the edge of the frame. The bed looked made the way she left it. The closet door sat closed by someone who wanted her to believe in closets. She ran a hand along the door jamb and felt a nick near the latch, the kind of mark you get from a key ring with too many keys on it. "Landlord?" Liz asked, reading her thought. Lena hesitated. She had always paid on time, always left a nice voicemail when the water ran rusty, always been the tenant who apologized to appliances out loud. The landlord, Mr. Sal, was a man who wore cologne like a hobby and called everyone kiddo. The maintenance guy, Victor, was quiet in the way of people who do their work under the noise of other people's lives. Neither had ever given her a reason to put their names in a sentence with fear. But reasons aren't always the point. Opportunity is. She called the landlord from speaker at the kitchen table while Jonah tinkered and Liz pretended not to listen and absolutely listened. The call picked up on the second ring with Sal, like a brand. She explained as far as she could without telling a man with a master key that someone with a master key might be part of this story. He tisked in the style of uncles and said how awful, how crazy, how modern life is basically a haunted house with better Wi-Fi. He offered to swing by with Victor just to look, and Lena's mouth said yes while the rest of her body said, "Please don't." They arrived faster than the time it takes an apology to do any good. Sal filled the doorway with a navy blazer and the smell of a good decision made by the wrong cologne, smiling with his voice and not his eyes. Victor followed in a grey hoodie, hands clean, keys on a loop that clinked a little too loudly in the quiet. Jonah was suddenly between Lena and the door, which was either gallant or paranoid, and in this case the same thing. Sal made concerned noises and asked if he could take a peek, which is a phrase both casual and invasive. The detective called back while the men walked through the rooms like tourists. He had a new sentence that sounded like a key being found under a mat. We pulled metadata from the clip you forwarded. He let the word ride the air a second, as if it might calm the room by itself. It's a restream. The source was an IP in your building, not necessarily you, another unit. Lena's eyes went to the ceiling and then to the floor, making a sandwich of herself between other lives. She thought of the neighbor with the sliding chair and the one who warmed up his car like it was a ritual. The detective added, "We'll need your landlord's access logs if he keeps them." Sal did, in the way of people who keep too much and too little at once. He showed Jonah a ring binder of maintenance entries, neat lines of dates and signatures that made a diagram of who had stood in which door, when. Lena recognized her own signature in two places, the day the thermostat died, and the week the tub coughed up a chorus of half-sung gurgles. The day she switched to the used DSLR, she remembered that by the way the sky looked that afternoon, there was another entry, one she had not signed. Victor's name sat in the column with a note that read, "Checked window seal." "Condensation," Victor volunteered without looking up, as if the notebook had spoken his name in a voice only he heard. "You said the window was sweating," he added, and then added too fast, "a while back." Lena had not. Sal clucked and said something about standards, and Jonah very politely asked if they could take a photo of the page. "For our records," he said, tasting the phrase like a wine. Sal hesitated for a heartbeat and then made a largesse gesture with his hand. The phone camera clicked, which in a certain light is just a camera saying yes to memory. Victor offered to reseat the smoke detector, since we're here, and Liz's no came out before Lena's maybe. "We're good," Liz said, the way bouncers say it at the door of the life you're trying to enter. Sal did the shrug that men do when told they aren't needed by someone who means it. They left with the same polite velocity they arrived with, doors shut softly, keys not quite jingling down the hall. Jonah, who had watched them the way a dog watches thunder, let out a breath that shaved a year off his face. "Either they're idiots," he said, "or they think we are." The detective texted 20 minutes later. "If you can, don't stay there tonight. Also, we're drafting a preservation letter for your building's camera system." Lena blinked at the phrase, "camera system," like it was a magic spell she should have known. The landlord had once bragged, drunk at a holiday open house, about the new ring of safety he'd installed. It was supposed to deter porch pirates and keep the mailboxes from eating packages. It never occurred to her that meant hallway eyes and stairwell ears. When she told Jonah, he nodded gravely. "Maybe the house learned your name in more ways than one." Afternoon slid into evening slower than usual, the light taking its time, leaving like a guest who won't cross the threshold because they know you'll lock the door behind them. Lena packed more deliberately this time, choosing not only clothes but objects that made rooms feel like hers. A small framed photo of her brother wearing a cone of papier-mâché at Halloween, a scarred wooden spoon her grandmother used to call trusty, a half-burned candle that smelled like cedar, and clean paper. She left the streaming gear in the closet, wrapped in a towel like a sleeping animal that might bite if woken. She locked the drawer with the camera, even though the lock was more symbolic than sturdy. Symbols matter. You don't hang a horseshoe because iron scares gravity. They stopped at the precinct on the way to Liz's. The detective met them under light that made everyone look more tired and honest. He had the OWL camera in an evidence bag and a printout of the SIM card data that looked like a city's map to someone who spoke that language. "The device hopped towers all over your block," he said. "Numbers change, but behavior doesn't. Whoever ran it liked to sit still." He pointed to a time window that overlapped neatly with Lena's late-night streams. They were in range, very in range. Most nights you were live. Lena tried not to imagine a car seat, a thermos in the cup holder, someone absorbing her life through a little rectangle of glass, like light through a straw. He asked about enemies, which was a word too dramatic for a life like hers, but also exactly the right word. She said no because the truth is most people's enemies are problems, not people. He asked about parasocial lines that felt crossed. She thought of Night Owl's notes and gifts and benevolence that had a shine she had chosen to see as kind. She mentioned the texts, "The plant looks healthy," "Blue suits you," and the detective's pen paused on the paper. He didn't look up, which somehow made the pause heavier. "We'll subpoena the carrier," he said, which is a way of saying the door might open if you ask the door politely, and also bring a pry bar. Back at Liz's, the ordinary act of making dinner felt like renting a small space where nothing bad happens for an hour. They chopped onions and pretended not to cry, and argued gently about pasta shapes as if their preferences could be scored. Lena's phone, now allowed to breathe, sat screen down but woke itself up with little glass sighs. She didn't touch it. She let it glow and go dark and glow again, like a lighthouse, refusing to admit the shore is gone. Near 9, she picked it up and turned off everything that made it a place for other people. The Do Not Disturb moon felt like a tiny umbrella in a hurricane, but even umbrellas matter. Sleep crept up behind her like a friend who means well. She dreamed of corridors that turned back on themselves and doors that opened onto the same room 2 degrees to the left. In the dream, she could hear chat, scrolling without seeing the words, a soft static of attention with no language left in it. She woke once to the sound of Liz turning over, and once to the sound of quiet being quiet, which is a sound you don't notice until you have learned to listen for other things. She did not wake at 3:21, which she noticed at 3:28 with surprise and a little piece of hope. At 8, the detective texted, "We got a hit. The unknown number that texted you piggybacks a VoIP account tied to an email. Username is Night Owl plus 4 digits. Could be coincidence, could be someone framing someone. We're working." Lena stared at the words until they blurred, like looking too long at rain on glass. The story her brain had politely refused to write began writing itself, letters carving soft grooves in the soft parts of her. She wanted it not to be him. She wanted it to be a confluence of unkind dots that only looked like a pattern. She wanted the version where the helper stays a helper and the line stays a line. She also wanted sleep, which is sometimes the same as wanting mercy. The mod team pinged her around noon, gentle but insistent. "We can shut the server for a bit," REI suggested. "Keeps the weirdos bored." Lena hesitated. The server was not just noise, it was where people posted dog pictures and recipes and told each other to drink water after crying at movies. It was her tavern, her porch light. But the repeated join leave pings had become a metronome for her anxiety, and even good lights attract moths. "Pause it," she typed. "Tell people I'm okay. Tell them I'll be back when I'm back." She added a heart, because you have to hand people something when you take something away. Jonah proposed a reset not of devices, but of habits. "If you stream again, we change the angles," he said, sketching with a finger on the table. "We turn the camera away from the door. We put a mirror behind you." Lena imagined sitting with her back to a mirror and felt her shoulders tighten. "Or," he continued, "we don't stream here at all. We borrow a studio, blank walls, one way in, one way out." He looked at her like a man offering 2 roads and admitting both have wolves. "You don't owe anyone more of yourself than you want to give." The detective texted again with a tone shift you can feel even in black letters on a white screen. We pulled the building's hallway cams. Motion at your door on multiple nights around 2-3 a.m. Male, hooded, height approx 5'8" to 5'10". Enters with a key, leaves within minutes. We're working on ID. Lena sat down as if a hand had pressed her. 5'10" is a big tent. It could be anyone. It could be Victor. It could be the guy upstairs with the heavy chair. It could be Night Owl if Night Owl lived close enough to treat the distance between stranger and door like a technical problem. The detective added, "We'll need you to confirm items missing or moved. Anything personal." She and Liz walked through the apartment that afternoon in a way she never had, seeing not objects but positions. The mug in the sink was handle left, and she always left it handle right. The blanket on the couch was folded differently than her hands fold. The plant had been watered, well watered, and Lena had not watered it. The details were small enough to argue with until you gathered them. Then they became a chorus. She wrote them down in a list that made her feel both sane and invaded, a grocery list for people who buy what they did not want to eat. At dusk, when rooms have opinions, Lena stood in the doorway of her bedroom and felt the tilt of something behind the air. She had the sensation of being late to a conversation that had been going on without her, long enough for the participants to stop pretending they weren't talking about her. On the dresser, her laptop sat closed and ordinary. On top of it, a tiny scrap of paper she did not remember writing rested like a folded moth. She went closer and read 3 words in her own handwriting that she did not write, door or wall. She did not scream. Screaming would have agreed too much with whatever left the note. She stepped back with a care that made her muscles tremble, like a person backing away from a dog that is not sure it's done growling. Liz came to her shoulder and made a sound that was teeth in a mouth. Jonah arrived as if he had been summoned, because maybe he had. "Gloves," he said, and produced a pair like a conjurer. He slid the note into a plastic sleeve like a butterfly wing. "We don't touch what doesn't belong to us," he said, and Lena almost laughed at the sentence, because if anything belonged to her, it should have been the inside of her name on paper. The detective came faster than paperwork usually allows. He took the note with the careful cheer of people handling things that make them angry. He asked Lena to walk him again through her last night in the apartment, small details first, big ones if necessary. She mentioned the kettle, the blinds, the way the floorboard by the bathroom complains like a sore knee. He nodded and asked about Night Owl in the same tone he had used for the kettle. "He's helpful," she said, and heard how foolish that sounded in sunlight. "He was helpful," she corrected, and the past tense felt like closing a book without a bookmark. There are moments when the world arranges itself into something you can't ignore anymore. For Lena, it arrived at 10:01 p.m. when her phone buzzed with a new email notification from a sender named N. Owl and a subject line that said, "You haven't quit." She tapped it because curiosity and fear share the same outlet and because she needed the electricity. The email body was plain, no attachments, no links, just a sentence that sounded like someone watching the same window you were. "New studio won't help if you bring your camera with you." Her mouth went dry and her hands went hot, a strange weather pattern only bodies understand. She had not mentioned a studio anywhere except in Jonah's kitchen and this apartment at this table. She imagined the invisible ears that might live in outlets and light fixtures and modern conveniences. Jonah swore softly, and then, with decisive anger, began unscrewing anything that could be unscrewed. "No more house for the house," he said. "You're done here." Liz nodded like a judge. "We move tonight," she said. And the word move finally meant what it should. Distance, new locks, fewer ghosts. They packed as if the apartment was sinking. 2 suitcases, a duffel, the plant in a grocery bag with the handles looped around the pot. Lena grabbed the owl keychain's empty shell from the drawer and held it for a second that stretched. She set it down again because souvenirs are not always trophies. Sometimes they're teeth. She left her desk chair, the one Chat teased, because it squeaked when she leaned too far left. She left the ring light because light is cheap and some lights learn you. She took the mug. She took the spoon. She took the photo of her brother in the cone. On the way out, the hallway camera blinked a tiny red eye as if grateful for attention. Lena looked at it and then at the lens of her own fear and lifted her chin a degree. "You don't get to keep me," she said, softer than air. In the stairwell, they passed Victor. He nodded at them, a small, measured nod, like a man who has practiced nodding in reflective surfaces. He glanced at the plant and at Lena's hands and then away. "Moving?" he asked, and the question sounded almost affectionate. Lena said, "For a bit," and kept walking. His keys made the shyest sound as he shifted his weight. They stayed that night in a borrowed studio Jonah found through an acquaintance, an engineer who owed him a favor. The space was windowless and clean in a way that felt kind. It smelled faintly of dust and cables. There was a single door with a lock that clunked honestly. Lena set the plant on a stool and the mug on a table and felt something unclench. Jonah wired a laptop to a network he built from boxes and numbers that looked like a wizard angrily doing math. "Air-gapped," he said, and smiled a small smile that for once didn't look tired. "If you stream again, it'll be from a place that only exists for an hour." Lena sat on a borrowed rolling chair that didn't squeak and faced a blank wall. She turned the camera on and looked into the glass and saw not herself, but a shape people call host when they mean person who agrees to be watched. She didn't hit go live, not yet. She let the preview sit there while the little battery icon glowed with possibility. She imagined the chat like a tide waiting behind a dam, names she loved and a few she feared mixed, like salt in water. Liz touched her shoulder. "You get to decide," she said, because saying it out loud makes it truer. The detective's last text came at 11:13, late enough to feel important. Working theory, someone in your building or with access spoofed your camera, installed physical devices, restreamed footage to create a delay. The clip title, "She's Still Here," may be taunt or test. We're closing in. Lena read it twice and then set the phone face down. She breathed out and felt the breath come back, a small loop, closing. She reached forward, covered the camera with her palm, and watched the preview go skin-colored and strange. Then she took her hand away and the room came back, plain and brave. Outside, the city's night carried on, sirens deciding and undeciding, tires hissing past puddles, strangers telling each other lies they could both live with. Inside the studio, the only sound was the small, earnest whir of a fan doing a job it would never receive thanks for. Lena lifted the mug, and it was empty, which feels like a metaphor when you're tired. She smiled at the plant without meaning to, at its stupid courage. "We'll water you tomorrow," she said, and the quiet accepted the promise like a contract. She did not stream that night. She did something harder. She waited. She waited on purpose, which is not the same as doing nothing. She waited for a room to become hers again, for her name to sound like something only she could say. And somewhere at 3:21 a.m., in a car or a room or a hallway that had learned her shape, someone opened a screen and watched a camera that stayed black. The watcher waited and the watcher heard nothing. And sometimes silence is the first good answer a house can give. The studio felt like a borrowed heartbeat, windowless, Clean. One door. A coil of taped-down cables drew a neat line from camera to capture card to a laptop Jonah had hardened until it barely trusted him. Lena sat in the pool of soft light and listened to the fan as if it were a metronome for courage. She wasn't live, not yet. That part mattered in her head. "You hit the button when you're ready," Liz said, fingertips on her shoulder, like she was offering balance rather than advice. The detective called with a tone you only hear when the shape of the case changes. He had preliminary results from the tower pings and the building cams. The SIM in the Owl had chatted with a burner phone that moved between two towers along her block. Between 1:50 and 3:40 a.m., it barely travelled a city block. The hallway footage showed a hooded figure using a key at her door 3 nights in a row. A second angle caught the same figure lingering near the stairwell railing, head tilted down to a lit phone. "We're circling a name," he said, "but I won't say it until it's nailed." Jonah had built a little fortress out of network boxes and stubbornness. Air-gapped machine for capture. Second machine for chat, wired through a privacy tunnel he swore even he couldn't peek through. He taped a paper eyelid over the face cam whenever Lena stood up, then peeled it back when she sat. "Paranoia is just realism with better posture," he muttered, which got a laugh it didn't deserve. The laugh helped anyway. She looked at the empty chat window and pictured it filling with the night crew, the usernames like familiar silhouettes at the back of a room. She drafted a return post she didn't send, a few sentences that said she was okay and missed them and would be back soon. She read it out loud once and decided it sounded like shouting across a river. Then she deleted it. The detective texted again, a 3-word lifeline. "Stay put tonight." She typed back a single dot because words were heavy and dots float. Liz poured water into the plant's pot and said, "There, officially a home." The soil drank quietly. The leaves steadied. At 9:42 p.m., a notification chimed on the hardened machine that wasn't connected to anything ordinary. A tiny red badge bloomed on Lena's Creator dashboard even though no browser was open. The title bar updated itself with a line of text, "Scheduled, after party, 10:30 p.m. She stared at it the way people stare at mirages they don't want to be thirsty for. "Did you schedule anything?" Jonah asked, voice too level. She shook her head once. He unplugged the Ethernet on reflex and checked the air-gapped laptop anyway, as if wires could lie. "It's not us," he said. "It's upstream." The entry was on her platform's side, a ghost event created from an API key that should have died when they wiped her machine. The detective answered on the first ring and said very calmly, "Don't touch it, let it happen, we're watching routing." Lena felt something old and unhelpful rise in her chest. The part of her that had trained a room to feel safe objected to being bait, even if the hook was the size of her name. "You don't have to do this," Liz whispered. Lena nodded because she heard the offer, not because she was taking it. At 10:27, the scheduled stream flipped to Live on Lena's channel without any machine in the room agreeing. The preview thumb populated on her phone even though her phone was in airplane mode because some alerts come from deeper places than settings. The title card wasn't hers, just a black frame with white text in a font she didn't use, "After Party." The viewer count pinged from 0 to 1 to 19 as the platform began handing out the event like a secret. "We are not pushing," Jonah said, eyes on his network boxes. "This is a restream from a source we don't own." They opened the stream on a separate device the detective had supplied, one that wouldn't speak unless spoken to. The video resolved past the compression haze and settled on a familiar wall. Cream paint, a faint scuff where a chair had once kissed it, a ring-light glow softening a corner. Lena's stomach dropped before her mind did. The frame was the studio. This room. The shot was from low on the opposite wall, a position no camera sat in. You could see the plant, the stool, the pencil mug she'd brought for luck. You could see Lena slightly side on as she lifted the paper eyelid from her own camera. For a long, brittle second, she did the stupid math of denial. Maybe this was old, she told herself. Maybe they'd set up earlier and forgotten, the way you forget you left a lamp on. Then the Lena in the video brushed a stray hair behind her ear, and the real Lena felt the strand at her temple and had not touched it yet. Jonah's voice found its way through cotton. "Delay," he said. 90 seconds, maybe less. It's behind us, not ahead." He looked at the plant. Then he looked at the baseboard. Then he didn't look at anything, which told its own story. The chat under the hijacked stream began to populate like a tide. Regulars, strangers, bots pretending to be people and people pretending to be bots. A few typed "OMG, she's back," and more typed "hacked," and one user with a new account wrote, "We missed you, door or wall?" Mods swung their invisible brooms and the line vanished and then multiplied, Hydra style, from fresh accounts. The camera angle in the pirate stream tightened by a breath, like someone's knee had shifted the mount. "Find it," Lena said, not loud. "Find the eye." Jonah dropped to the floor with a headlamp like he was a researcher in a cave. He ran his hand along the baseboard and under the desk lip. He checked the underside of the plant's pot and cursed softly when something bit his fingertip, the sharp edge of plastic, a glued seam. He pried, careful and fast, and a thumbnail-sized panel came away to reveal a pinhole and a wire like a hair. "You came with us," he whispered, not to Lena, to the thing. He yanked the wire and the pinhole died. The pirate stream didn't. Whatever was sending this wasn't that. On screen 90 seconds ago, the other Lena glanced toward the door because the fan made an honest little cough. In the present, the fan coughed. The time difference shrank in Lena's head, not because the delay changed, but because her body began to fit both clocks at once. The detective's voice pushed through the speaker from somewhere with sirens in the background. "Trace is bouncing between two nodes. One of them is a handset we have a partial on, likely in your immediate area. We are en route. Stay where you are. Do not open the door." The pirate camera's frame trembled once, as if a hand-rested weight shifted from one foot to the other. Something entered from the top edge of the shot, just the corner of a hood, the suggestion of a shoulder refracted by the lens into the same dark geometry she had watched at her apartment door. In the studio, the air changed texture. It wasn't colder, it was narrower. Liz's fingers pressed crescents into Lena's shoulder the way bodies leave marks on sand. "Cops are minutes out," Liz said, "because you say minutes, the way you say it's nothing when it isn't." On the stream, the man, because it was a man, the posture and height put the pronoun in her mouth, stood now fully in frame behind the other Lena. He didn't touch her. He tilted his head and seemed to measure the distance to her spine. His face was nothing. Hood, cloth, the flat anonymity night wears. He lifted his hand and it held nothing that glinted, which is somehow worse than something that does. Lena in the room put both palms on the table because anchors matter. "He's already in the last 90 seconds, she said. "We're already inside his past." The door handle made a sound that doors make when someone on the other side decides to tell you the rest of a story. It didn't turn, the lock held. Something thin and metal inserted where turning would have happened. The wedge under the door squealed and dug in. The detective shouted through the phone, distance compressing a human voice into a flat, urgent ribbon. "Do not engage! Stay away from the door." Jonah grabbed the heaviest thing in reach, which was a tripod, and braced it like people brace themselves when they don't know what else to do. On the screen, the other Lena finally turned because even 90 seconds ago she had felt it too. The man leaned in close enough that Pixels tried to give him a face and failed. He put his mouth near her ear, a near kiss made out of intent rather than affection, and said something the mic didn't catch, or maybe the system refused to remember. The chat blew up so fast the letters stopped being letters and became foam. Call 911 repeated down the feed like a prayer wheel. 3 usernames typed Victor at the same time. Lena felt her ribs realize they were a cage. She took a step back from the table, the way people step back from cliffs they trusted a minute ago. The door's metal cried softly against the wedge. From the ceiling corner, something made a near-silent tick, like plastic shrinking in heat, and Jonah's head snapped up. He climbed the chair and dug fingers into the seam of an acoustic tile. A small square fell into his hand, black, cheap, sticky edges, passive pickup. He crushed it without ceremony. The present didn't change, the past in the stream didn't either. Time kept to itself, which felt rude. Sirens drew a geometry outside, approaching, pausing at intersections, negotiating with lights. In the video, the man behind the other Lena lifted something from his pocket, and the lens didn't reflect it. It swallowed it. He placed the tip against her neck with the careful intimacy of a hairstylist and gently pulled her hair aside. The other Lena opened her mouth and either spoke or didn't. The pirate stream stuttered once, artifacting his hand into Pixels, and then back. Jonah whispered, not to either Lena. Non-lethal. Stun. He was guessing, but it lodged like a fact. The handle popped, not turning, but unseating the latch with a skill that made Lena understand how doors fail. The wedge held. The man on the other side exhaled a small, irritated breath that somehow found its way through the gap and defined the room's shape. On the hijacked stream, he pressed the device and the other Lena arched once, muscles performing a panicked, involuntary choreography. Her chair rolled a few inches and knocked a pencil to the floor. In the room, a pencil rolled off Lena's table as if to prove time wasn't on anyone's side, but its own. The door stopped trying. The silence on the other side changed, concentrated, like a person stepping back not to leave, but to choose a different approach. Liz breathed in 6 counts and out 6 counts and kept going even when it didn't help. The detective's voice fragmented into dispatch jargon and then returned. "We're in the building. Stay clear of the door. Officers will identify." On the stream, the man lifted the other Lena under the arms with the practiced clumsiness of someone who has done this before. The chat became a field of no, 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 punctuated by the one message that felt like it had weight. Night Owl. Lena, stay where you are. She tasted the name like a coin. The detective had said they were circling it. The VoIP account, the texts, the benevolence turned into a path. He could be spoofed, Jonah whispered. He wanted that to be true the way people want weather to change because they brought an umbrella. The stream's time bar showed 10 minutes elapsed, longer than she wished, shorter than it felt. The other, Lena's head lolled as the man dragged her out of frame. The camera did not follow. The camera never does. It just keeps its eye on the space you leave behind. There was a knock on the door, 3 times, quick, a rhythm from older parts of the brain. "Police," a voice called, and even though half of life is people lying about who they are, that voice had the edges of paperwork and training. Jonah kicked the wedge loose with the heel of his hand and opened the door to 2 uniforms and the detective in plain clothes, hair damp from night. The hall behind them smelled like concrete and secrets. They swept in, methodical, the way professionals do to make your fear feel amateur. The detective's gaze caught the still-running pirate stream on the separate device and did a small flinch that was almost invisible. He looked at the door, at the hinges, at the thin pried bark where metal had kissed wood. He pointed with 2 fingers to the top seam of the wall. "Hidden lens up there," he said, and the uniform nearest him nodded like he'd found a coat hook. Jonah already had the tile in his hand like a magician revealing an old trick. The detective didn't smile. "Different lens," he said, and gestured to the outlet near the plant. "Smart outlet, camera combo, new drones, sell them for apartments now." He crouched, pried, and held up a faceplate that should have been innocent. They planned for tenants. They unplugged what could be unplugged. The stream hiccuped once and then continued, which meant the signal wasn't relying on this room anymore. "Restream source is cloud-based," the detective said to no one and everyone. "Scrub your channel credentials, get them rotated." Jonah's fingers became hammers on keys. Liz stood in the doorway like a guard who had volunteered and then become one. Lena watched the last minute of the pirate video because people look at accidents even when they shouldn't. The frame settled back to the empty stool and the plant, the same, like nothing had happened, except the room had swallowed a person and decided not to talk about it. The detective's phone chirped, and his face tightened in the tiny way people watch themselves not show you what they feel. He turned slightly away out of habit, and then turned back. "We pulled a plate off the car that's been idling near your building at night," he said. "Belongs to a maintenance contractor. Victor is on the registry as an authorized driver. He's not in his unit. We're picking him up if we can." The name hit like a chair scraping upstairs. Obvious, and somehow worse for it. "A night owl?" Lena asked, because someone had to say it out loud. "Email chain ties to a prepaid and a Gmail created at a library 2 blocks from your cafe," the detective said, then paused as if testing the sentence for strength. The library camera caught a man matching Victor's build and gait. "He bought coffees on your block 20 minutes later. That's as much as I'll say until it's more." He studied her like a person deciding whether to tell you the tide schedule. "He learned you, Ms. Alvarez," he added softly. "That's all it took." She nodded without meaning to, as if he had asked for permission to tell her something she already knew. They powered everything down and sat with the honest dark. The pirate stream died at 11:03 p.m., not with a flourish, just a cough, and then a grey box that said, "This live event has ended." The chat emptied like a room embarrassed to have watched. A few stragglers typed, "Stay safe," and "We love you," and 2 tried to post links to mirrors before the mods smothered them in blankets of bans. The detective asked Lena if she would give a statement now or tomorrow, and she said now because sleep was far away anyway. She described carefully the way fear makes rooms echo. He wrote it down in words that looked skinnier than the thing they were meant to hold. They left her with 2 patrol cars below and a promise to return before dawn. Liz curled on the studio sofa with a blanket and an expression like a courtroom sketch of courage. Jonah dozed in a chair with his shoes on and his hand still on the laptop, as if the machine could roll away in the night. Lena sat where she had sat the whole time and tried to make the room ring with her, not with whatever had lived here with her. She thought of the first night she had called a chat safe, and the small, accidental vow in that. "You're safe here," she had said. She wanted to believe it again more than she wanted to sleep. At 2:58 a.m. the plant made a tiny, inexplicable sound, the tick of a leaf adjusting its life. Outside, tires sighed through a shallow puddle like a long relief. The quiet grew something like a spine. Lena stood, stretched, and looked at the lens on her honest camera. It looked back like glass looks back, dumb, ready, able to show you whatever you aim it at. She reached for the cap, covered it, and the world became a soft black circle with nothing in the middle. Tomorrow, she told it, as if cameras understand calendars. She didn't hear the door in the hallway open because it didn't. It had already been open. A second inner door, a unit down, the one that led to a maintenance closet that joined this suite through a fire-rated panel, whispered as a latch caught and released. The detective would later call it an architectural oversight, which is a very polite way to say secret path. In the moment, the studio simply inhaled. The panel behind the fabric-wrapped acoustic baffle flexed by a hair the way skin does when someone presses the other side. Lena lifted her head because rooms have body language, and this one had just shrugged. The baffle grill popped with a sound like a jar finally giving up. The rectangle swung an inch, a gloved hand slid through the gap and tested the air like a blind thing learning a room. The second hand followed, then the arm, then the hooded head. The man was smaller than the shadow had promised, and larger than the space seemed to allow. He stepped out careful, not because he cared for noise, but because he cared for control. Lena saw him as if he were already in a recording, flat, two-dimensional, refusing to absorb light. Some people are like that in fear. Some are like that in life. She did not scream. She backed toward the table and the phone lying face down on it. The room behind her felt like a stage with the audience lights on. Jonah woke with the sharp inhale of a person whose dream didn't end when it was supposed to. Liz came up out of the blanket, already moving toward Lena. The man's eyes under the hood found the plant, the stool, the camera with its cap on, the door with its wedge back in place. He did a small thing with his head, a disappointed angle. He lifted his hand and showed them an empty palm as if to say, "See? This is nothing." Then he took a step closer and the nothing filled the room. We could slow this down and count each breath. We could speed it up and call it inevitable. Here's the version that fits in a human throat. The man moved, Jonah moved, the tripod hit the floor and became a line and not a weapon. The device in the man's hand met skin. Electricity wrote its ugly, cursive up an arm. Bodies did what bodies do when they have to choose between running and making someone else time to run. Liz dragged Lena toward the door that wasn't a door anymore because wedges and locks and physics still have a vote. Lena's fingers found the detective's card and dialed without thinking about whether phones care about thinking. The call connected while the room decided whether to be merciful. The detective's voice in motion said, "We're outside." And then a sound like metal meeting metal echoed from the hall, the rapid, muscular rattle of a master key on a lock that didn't want to be opened. The wedge surrendered as if it had been waiting for permission to quit. The door broke inward in a rush of uniforms and daylight-bright flashlights. The man turned with the stoic disbelief of someone whose private theater has been rented to the public. He ran for the panel he had come through and found it already blocked by a body in blue and a baton. The sprint lasted the length of a long blink. Then it stopped being a sprint and became paperwork. There was shouting, but not for long. There were commands that overrode choice, and hands on wrists, and a hood pushed back to reveal a face Lena knew she knew. It wasn't the shock of a stranger, it was the uglier shock of recognition. Victor, hair flattening to his scalp, eyes older than his driver's license, mouth set in the neutral line of men who don't drive fast enough to get pulled over. He looked at Lena like a craftsman looks at a project interrupted. For a second, not more, his face softened into a kind of fondness that made Lena step back a full step. He truly believed he had been caretaking something. That was the horror, sharp as any blade. They read him his rights, and he nodded as if he'd heard them before in a different key. The detective's jaw worked like a muscle he'd been using too long. He looked at the panel, at the maintenance closet beyond, at the tool roll laid out inside like silverware. He looked at the plant and the outlet and the tile and the way the room had been turned into a map. "Some people collect stamps," he said quietly, to no one in particular. "Some collect people." He put a hand on the table near Lena's and didn't touch it, and the not touching was the kindest part. They took Victor away, and the hallway swallowed the noise again. The studio sagged, as if the room had been holding its breath. Liz was crying now, not because of one thing, but because of 200. Jonah sat hard and laughed once in disbelief, the laugh you hear at the end of long funerals when someone drops a hymnal and the absurdity lets everyone breathe again. Lena stood very still and looked at the camera with its cap on and thought about the sentence that had followed her around like a stray. "You're safe here." She believed it in that moment the way you believe the tide chart after a storm, cautiously, gratefully, with conditions. In the days that followed, some things were simple and some were not. The case turned into filings and hearings and a story that other people told in rooms Lena wasn't in. The pirate stream was preserved, then pulled, then mirrored by strangers trying to explain it to themselves. Night Owl's account went dark, then bright with imposters, then dark again. The landlord sent an email with 3 sentences of apology and 8 sentences about legal exposure. The mod team kept the community closed a week longer than anyone wanted because they wanted to want the right thing more than the fun thing. Lena did go live again. Not that week, not the next. Weeks later, in a studio where the plant had more light and the outlet covers came from a brand that insisted on being dumb, she sat in the same pool of soft and looked into a lens that had earned more of her trust than she had any business giving glass. She told the truth, the maintained version of it, the kind that leaves out the parts that are just for you and your therapist and a few good friends. She watched the chat fill with the right kinds of noise. She smiled when she could and swallowed hard when she had to. She did not say, "You're safe here." She said, "We're careful here," and the room nodded. And the title of this story? It isn't literal, not the way rumor tells it, but it's close enough to stick. On the night they took him, Lena watched a stream of herself, watched her own body in a room become a target in a recording she hadn't made. For 90 long seconds she watched the version of herself living just behind her present tense, watched the hands reaching, watched the moment danger touched skin. She watched the end the man had planned and saw it arrive for someone else. The her in the past, and not for the her who stood breathing in the now. In a way that counts, she watched herself die and chose, with help, to go on anyway. If you ask her what she learned, she'll tell you a camera is not a window or a mirror. It's a door. It opens in both directions. And the thing on the other side, helpful, hungry, human, only needs you to forget that for a second. She doesn't forget now. She checks the corners. She laughs with her people. She waters the plant. And when the stream goes quiet and the room remembers it's only a room, she leaves the lens capped a moment longer and listens to the hum of the fan. Just to hear the quiet answer back with nothing at all.